What if I told you that the world's greatest armies perished where the indigenous peoples of America felt at home? History knows many examples of well-equipped expeditions freezing to death, despite having tents and stoves, while local tribes slept peacefully under the open sky on the same night. It seems impossible, but the survival skills of the North American Indians were based not on fighting nature, but on a deep understanding of its deadly laws. They did not try to defeat the cold, they became part of it, using snow as a blanket and the icy wind as an ally. For centuries, the tribes of the Great Plains and subarctic forests honed their skills, allowing people not only to survive, but to exist comfortably in conditions that we would call hell. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how one small detail in footwear saved people from amputation of their toes, and why sleeping in a snowdrift is safer than sleeping by a fire. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of human capabilities? For European colonists, winter was always an enemy, a ruthless killer from whom one had to hide behind thick walls and closed shutters. For Native Americans, however, winter was a harsh but fair teacher, a period of purification and rest for the earth, to be treated with respect rather than fear. This fundamental difference in thinking determined the difference in approaches to survival. One fought and expended energy, the other adapted and conserved energy. The Lakota and Cheyenne did not perceive frost as evil. They saw it as a force that could be harnessed if one knew the right rituals and methods. Indigenous peoples understood that cold kills not only the body, but also the spirit. So the first line of defense was in the human mind. Panic at the first signs of hypothermia killed more people than the cold itself, causing them to act chaotically and lose precious heat. From childhood, warriors learned to control their breathing and heartbeat, entering a state of special calm that slowed their metabolism. This was not magic, but training of the nervous system, allowing them to ignore discomfort in order to maintain clarity of mind. The ability to sit motionless for hours, wrapped in a bison's skin, was more important than the ability to run fast or shoot. In their culture, there was an understanding that heat was a resource to be stored, not wasted. Europeans often tried to warm themselves up with vigorous activity, chopping wood, running, sweating, and then freezing even faster when their wet clothes turned into an icy shell. The Indian knew that sweat in winter meant certain death, so all his movements were smooth, measured, and economical. He could walk dozens of kilometers on snowshoes without breaking a sweat, regulating his pace and the ventilation of his clothing. This art of cold marching was passed down from generation to generation as the highest wisdom of survival. Nature provided clues at every turn. One only had to know how to read and interpret them correctly. The behavior of animals, the structure of the snow cover, the shape of the clouds, all of this spoke of impending danger long before the first gusts of the blizzard. The Indians watched as bison gathered in tight groups, turning their heads toward the wind so that their fur would work as efficiently as possible. They saw small rodents burrowing deep into the snow, where the temperature remained stable, and adopted these strategies. Survival was an act of mimicry, of imitating those who had lived here for millions of years before humans appeared. The attitude toward cold as a living entity permeated all aspects of life, from the construction of dwellings to the cut of clothing. Even in the most severe frosts, a special microclimate was maintained in the teepee or wigwam, which did not create a sharp contrast with the street. The temperature difference was not supposed to shock the body, so it was warm but not hot inside the dwelling. This allowed the body to stay in shape and be ready to go outside at any moment without the risk of getting sick. Hardening began at an early age, when children were taught to wash with snow and sleep in the cool. It is interesting to note that many subarctic tribes, such as the Cree and Athabascan, considered winter to be the best time for travel. In summer, swamps and gnats made travel unbearable, while in winter, frozen rivers turned into ideal high-speed highways. Blizzards were not an obstacle for them, but simply a weather phenomenon that required a change of tactics, not a halt to life. They knew how to find their way in the white fog, navigating by the wind and the shape of snowdrifts, as if reading a map. This psychological attitude transformed a deadly threat into a working environment. European observers were often amazed at how easily the Indians, who at first glance appeared to be lightly dressed, endured nights in the forest. The secret was not in the thickness of their clothing, but in their understanding of the principles of thermoregulation and blood circulation. They knew that the core of the body, the torso and head, needed to be warm first so that warm blood would reach the extremities. If their limbs froze, they never rubbed them with snow, as white people mistakenly did, traumatizing the skin. Their methods of restoring blood circulation were gentler and more physiological. The philosophy of survival included the ability to stop in time without trying to overcome the elements. Pride in a blizzard was the shortest path to death, and no experienced hunter was ashamed to turn back or bury himself in the snow. Recognizing the power of nature was not considered a weakness. It was a manifestation of the highest wisdom and professionalism. The ability to wait, remaining calm in a cramped snow shelter for days on end, required tremendous discipline. It was this patience that often became the deciding factor between life and death. Even death from cold was, in their view, a transition, a sleep into which a person falls. And this fatalism paradoxically helped them survive. The fear of death did not paralyze their will, but forced them to act clearly and deliberately. They knew that panic burned glucose in the blood, depriving the body of its last fuel for warmth. Therefore, in a critical situation, the Indian became absolutely calm, like a stone. This mental armor was stronger than any woolen fabric. Modern science confirms that many of these intuitive practices have a strict physiological basis. Adaptation to cold at the genetic and behavioral level allowed indigenous peoples to withstand temperatures that would be fatal to an unprepared person. We often look for complex technical solutions to problems, forgetting simple truths. What do you think? Are modern people capable of developing the same mental fortitude? Or are we hopelessly spoiled by comfort? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how snow can keep you warmer than a wool blanket? For most people, snow is associated exclusively with cold, but for the indigenous peoples of the North, it was the best building material and insulator. The structure of snowflakes traps a huge amount of air, creating a porous layer that perfectly retains heat from the body or a small source of fire. Tribes in the subarctic belt, such as the Athabascans, perfected the art of building snow shelters, creating dwellings that could withstand any blizzard. This knowledge was critical to the survival of hunters caught in bad weather, far from their main camp. One of the most effective temporary shelters was the quinzhee, a snow hut that was not built from blocks like an igloo, but dug out of a large pile of snow. The hunter would rake the snow into a huge mound, allowing it to settle and harden in the cold for several hours. This process, called sintering, made the structure incredibly strong, capable of supporting a person's weight and withstanding hurricane-force winds. He then carefully dug out the interior cavity, creating a dome-shaped space. The walls had to be of a certain thickness. Too thin and they would not retain heat, too thick and they could collapse. Inside such a shelter, the temperature could remain around 0 degrees or even slightly above, even if it was 40 degrees below zero outside. The entrance was always made below floor level, creating a so-called cold pit where heavy cold air flowed. Warm air, being lighter, rose and accumulated under the dome, where people slept. This simple physics worked flawlessly, creating a pocket of warmth in the middle of the icy desert. A small oil lamp or even the warmth of one's own body quickly heated the small space. An important element of the design was a small ventilation hole in the ceiling, which prevented suffocation and removed excess moisture. If the walls began to thaw and become covered with a crust of ice, this created additional insulation, but required control of oxygen access. An experienced builder always kept a stick handy to clear the ventilation in case of heavy snowfall. The ability to regulate airflow inside a snow cave was a real art. The balance between heat retention and fresh air was delicate and vital. If there was no time to build a quinzhee, natural shelters were used, such as under the lower branches of fir trees covered with snow. The branches created a natural frame, and the snow on top served as an excellent roof, under which an air cavity formed. A tree well. All the hunter had to do was expand this space and compact the walls to create a cozy nest. The bottom was lined with a thick layer of spruce branches, which insulated the person from the cold ground. Such an express shelter could be prepared in a matter of minutes. In open plains where there were no trees or deep snow, tribes used their bodies and skins. They dug a shallow trench and lay down in it, covering themselves with bison robes and allowing the blizzard to cover them from above. The snow cover that formed on top of the skin acted as an additional layer of insulation, protecting them from the wind. In the morning, such a snowdrift began to stir, and a living and relatively warm person emerged from it. The main thing was to regularly shake the skin from the inside so that the snow did not compress into an icy shell. There were also more complex techniques, such as building windbreaks from snow bricks to protect the main dwelling, known as a teepee. During heavy snowstorms, snow was deliberately piled onto the lower part of the teepee, creating an additional insulating barrier around the perimeter. This prevented the wind from blowing under the cover and kept the heat close to the ground. In this way, the dwelling itself became part of the landscape, blending in with it. Snow was transformed from an enemy into an element of architecture. The skill of working with snow included the ability to determine its quality and suitability for construction. Loose, freshly fallen snow, frozen sugar snow, or dense crust required different approaches and tools. Sometimes the snow had to be specially compacted with snowshoes to give it the required density. An error in assessing the material could lead to the collapse of the shelter in the middle of the night. Inside such snow shelters, there was an amazing silence, as snow absorbs sound perfectly. Outside, a storm could be howling, breaking trees, but inside, a person could hear only their own breathing. This silence helped to calm down and regain strength, giving a feeling of security. Psychological comfort in such conditions was no less important than physical warmth. These methods show that survival depends not on fighting the elements, but on the ability to use their properties to one's advantage. The Indians did not build fortresses against the snow, they built fortresses out of snow. What do you think was the most important thing inside such a snow house for preserving life? Guess how long it took to create the perfect winter clothing? Millennia of evolution and experimentation have led to the creation of a wardrobe that surpasses many modern synthetic materials in terms of effectiveness. The clothing of indigenous peoples not only protected against the cold, it breathed Wickham. The secret lay in the multi-layered and unique processing of materials, the main one being bison, deer, or elk leather. This clothing was literally a second skin, alive and responsive to the needs of the body. The basis of the winter costume was suede, tanned using a method that made the leather soft, breathable, and resistant to getting wet. Unlike European leather, which stiffened in the cold, becoming as hard as iron, Native American suede remained elastic at any temperature. The tanning process was long and laborious. The skins were scraped, soaked in a mixture of animal brains, and smoked for a long time. The smoke not only preserved the leather, but also gave it water-repellent properties. Such clothing was not affected by snow and dried quickly by the fire. The main principle of insulation was the air trap between the fur fibers and layers of clothing. Native Americans wore fur on the inside, closer to the body, creating an air cushion that retained heat. Outerwear, such as parkas worn by northern peoples or capes worn by plains tribes, was often made with the fur on the outside so that snow would not melt on the surface from body heat and wet the skin. This combination of fur to the body, fur to the outside, created an insurmountable barrier to the cold. Special attention was paid to footwear, as feet freeze first and the life of a nomad depends on them. Moccasins were sewn to be roomy so that there was space inside for insulation. Dry grass, moss, or bison wool was used as insulation, which was stuffed into the moccasins around the foot. The grass created an excellent air layer and absorbed excess moisture, keeping the feet dry. If the grass got wet, it was simply thrown away and replaced with fresh grass. A brilliant disposable solution. To protect against deep snow, they used high leggings that were attached to the belt, covering the legs from the ankle to the thigh. They worked like gaiters, preventing snow from getting inside the shoes. In severe frosts, they wore special winter moccasins with high tops, sewn from skins with thick fur inside. The soles were treated in a special way so as not to slip on ice and snow. The most important item was the bison robe, a huge skin with thick winter wool, which was worn as a cloak or blanket. The robe was a versatile item. During the day, it protected from the wind. At night, it served as a bed, and if necessary, it could be quickly turned into a shelter. The Indians knew how to wrap themselves in the robe so that only their eyes remained outside, creating a cocoon of warm air inside. The drawings on the inside of the robe often served as a calendar or chronicle of the owner's exploits. Mittens were sewn from beaver or otter skins, whose fur was particularly thick and water-resistant. Mittens were often tied together with a cord around the neck so that they could not be lost in the turmoil of a storm or during hunting. Losing a mitten in the cold could cost a person their hands, so this item was treated with special care. Sometimes slits were made in the palms so that the fingers could be quickly freed to shoot a bow. Headgear ranged from simple fur bandages to hoods trimmed with wolverine or wolf fur. Wolverine fur was especially prized because it did not freeze with breath. The fibers of this fur are smooth and do not absorb moisture, which kept the face dry and protected. The hood was designed to create a tunnel of calm air around the face. The decoration on the clothing also had a practical purpose. The fringe on the sleeves and trousers was not for beauty, but to divert water. During rain or snow melt, water ran down the fringe and dripped from its ends without soaking the clothing itself. Bead embroidery provided additional rigidity and protection in vulnerable areas. Every stitch had a purpose. This clothing system was modular. Layers could be removed or added depending on activity and weather. This prevented overheating and sweating, the main enemy in cold weather. Would you like to try wearing such clothes in modern winter? Like this post if you think natural materials can be better than synthetics. What if I showed you how to build a fire inside your home without suffocating from the smoke? Fire was the heart of survival, but in the confined space of a teepee or snow hut, it could be deadly. Carbon monoxide and acrid smoke were just as dangerous as the cold outside. The art of controlling draft and choosing the right fuel were skills that everyone who wanted to survive the winter had to master. Native Americans developed sophisticated ventilation systems that turned their dwellings into efficient chimneys. In teepees, the upper valves, or ears, were responsible for the draft, and their position was adjusted by long poles from the outside. By turning these valves depending on the direction of the wind, it was possible to create a powerful draft that sucked all the smoke out through the top opening. Inside the teepee, an inner lining called an ozon was stretched around the perimeter, reaching from the ground to human height. Cold air penetrating under the edges of the outer covering passed between it and the ozon, rose upward, and created air draft, carrying away the smoke. This created a unique effect. Inside the teepee, in the living area, the air was clean and warm, and the smoke hung only under the dome itself. In snow shelters, the principle was similar, but more subtle. It was impossible to build a large fire there, so tiny sources of fire were used. Fat lamps with moss wicks provided enough heat to raise the temperature above zero, but produced almost no smoke. Fuel was scarce on the Great Plains, especially in winter when everything was covered with snow. Trees only grew near rivers, so dry bison patties, chips, served as the main fuel. They burned with a hot, even flame without sparks and gave off a pleasant, sweetish smoke that did not sting the eyes. The Indians harvested them by the ton during the warm season, storing them in dry places. The ability to start a fire in a blizzard required special skill and preparation. Hunters always carried tinder with them in a waterproof bag made from an animal's bladder. Tinder was made from rotten wood, dry tinder fungus, or plant fluff. Fire was obtained by friction or striking sparks, and this process took seconds even with frozen hands. The main thing was to protect the first spark from the wind with your body and clothing. Inside temporary shelters, the method of reflected heat was often used. A fire was lit at the entrance under a canopy, and behind it a screen of logs or stones was placed. The heat was reflected from the screen and directed inside the shelter where people slept. This allowed them to keep warm without risking burning down their homes or suffering from smoke. Such a heat gun was extremely effective. Another clever technique was the use of heated stones. The stones were heated in a fire outside and then brought inside the dwelling. They worked like batteries, giving off heat for hours without any smoke or oxygen consumption. The stones could be placed in the sleeping area or even buried in the earthen floor to warm it up. There was also a method called underground fire, or Dakota hearth, where two connected pits were dug, one for the fire and the other for air supply. Such a fire was hidden underground, gave off almost no light, which was important for camouflage, and consumed very little fuel. The earth around the hearth heated up, serving as an excellent hot water bottle. Special attention was paid to not melting the walls of the snow shelter too much. If the temperature rose too high, the walls began to leak, wetting clothes and equipment. Therefore, the intensity of the fire was constantly monitored, maintaining a balance on the verge of melting. This required constant attention even during rest periods. Fire was a living thing that had to be fed and respected. It was never extinguished with water, as this was considered an insult to the spirit of fire. It had to burn out on its own or be covered with earth. In the next chapter, you will learn what fuel the Indians used to keep the fire burning inside their own bodies. Survival in the cold is primarily a matter of energy. In the cold, the human body works like a furnace, burning calories at a frantic rate to maintain core temperature. Indigenous peoples understood perfectly well that without proper nutrition, even the warmest clothing is useless. Their diet changed dramatically in winter, becoming extremely fatty and high in calories. This was a conscious form of biohacking that allowed the body to generate enormous amounts of heat from within. The main superfood of the plains in the north was pemmican. It is a concentrated mixture of dried and powdered bison or deer meat mixed with an equal amount of melted fat and sour berries. Pemmican could be stored for years without spoiling, was compact and incredibly nutritious. A piece the size of a palm contained thousands of calories, necessary for a whole day of hard travel. Fat was the main thing. Protein poisoning, or rabbit starvation, was a real threat when eating only lean meat. The body uses more energy to digest protein than it gets from it, which in the cold leads to rapid exhaustion and death. Therefore, hunters always sought out the fattest animals, and bone marrow was considered a delicacy and the best remedy for the cold. It was eaten raw or cooked, providing pure energy. Before going to bed on a cold night, Native Americans tried to eat a piece of pure fat. Fat is digested slowly, providing a steady supply of energy and heat throughout the night. It worked like slow fuel for an internal stove, preventing a person from freezing in their sleep. A hungry person freezes much faster than a full one. Hot soups also played an important role when it was possible to build a fire. They warmed the body from the inside, restored water balance, and lifted the spirits. Hot stones were often thrown into the broth to bring it to a boil in wooden or leather dishes that could not be placed on the fire. This method allowed hot food to be cooked without metal utensils. Water balance was critical, as dehydration thickens the blood and impairs circulation, accelerating frostbite. Eating snow was strictly forbidden. It cooled the body and wasted energy on melting it. Snow was melted in containers or, as a last resort, stuffed into small bags and hidden under clothing so that it would melt from body heat but not come into direct contact with the stomach. Preparing food for the winter was a large-scale operation. Meat was cut into thin strips and dried in the sun and wind to make jerky. Berries were dried or mixed with fat. Animal stomachs and bladders were used as airtight containers for storing supplies. The loss of such supplies due to raids by enemies or wild animals meant starvation for the entire tribe. The Indians also knew of plants that helped them endure the cold. Decoctions of pine or spruce needles were rich in vitamin C and prevented scurvy, which weakened the body. Willow bark tea worked as a mild pain reliever and anti-inflammatory, helping with joint pain from the cold. In harsh times, when hunting was unsuccessful, everything was eaten. The inner layer of tree bark, cambium, lichens after long soaking, and even leather ammunition. The ability to find food where there was none was part of the science of survival. This high-fat diet allowed them to maintain a high metabolic rate. Europeans, accustomed to bread and porridge, often suffered from a lack of energy in such conditions, not understanding why the Indians were so energetic. Are you ready to learn how to sleep in the snow and still dream? Sleeping in a blizzard was the most dangerous time of day. If a person fell asleep and their temperature dropped below a critical level, they might not wake up again. Therefore, organizing a place to sleep was not just a mundane task, but a complex ritual, thought out down to the smallest detail. Solitude was a luxury that was not available in winter. Survival was a collective effort. The main rule for spending the night was to avoid direct contact with the cold ground. The ground draws heat from the body dozens of times faster than the air. The bedding made of pine branches, twigs, dry grass, or skins had to be thick and multi-layered. The Indians said, "Spend time on your bed, or the ground will take your time forever." The thicker the mattress of branches, the better the chances of waking up. Group sleeping was the norm. People slept huddled close together, combining the warmth of their bodies into one common pot. They often used a fan or circle pattern, with the feet of all sleepers pointing toward the center, where heated stones or smoldering coals might lie. The most vulnerable members of the group, children and the elderly, were placed in the middle, while the strongest warriors lay at the edges. Before going to sleep, they always checked that their clothes were dry. Wet moccasins were taken off and placed under them, or even on their stomachs to dry them with body heat overnight. Sleeping in wet shoes meant getting frostbite by morning. Outer clothing was often untied to improve blood circulation, but not completely removed, using it as a blanket. If they had to spend the night alone without shelter, they would curl up in the fetal position. They would pull their knees up to their chest and cross their arms, minimizing the surface area of their body that gave off heat. They would pull their head into their shoulders, covering their face with a fur collar. In this position, their internal organs were protected and heat loss was minimal. The heated stones we mentioned earlier were wrapped in pieces of leather or grass and placed at the feet or in the lower back area. Such a stone heater could keep the heat until morning. It was a simple but incredibly effective way to increase sleeping comfort. It was important not to overheat before going to sleep. If you lay down in a sleeping bag or under skins while hot and sweaty, moisture would condense and then freeze. Therefore, before lying down, it was necessary to cool down a little and calm your breathing. Dogs were also used. The dogs in the camp were not only guards in transport, but also living hot water bottles. On the coldest nights, the dogs were allowed into the dwelling and slept huddled together with the people. The expression, "night of 3 dogs," meant severe frost for some peoples when 3 dogs were needed to keep warm. They had to wake up often. The cold prevented them from falling into a deep sleep, which was a good thing. Periodic awakening allowed them to assess their condition, move their toes, and check on their companions. It was the sensitive, superficial sleep of a predator. The ability to quickly set up a place to sleep using only a knife, and whatever was at hand was valued more highly than the ability to shoot. In the next chapter, you will learn how people lived in longhouses, where hundreds of people spent the winter under one roof. Unlike the nomads of the plains, the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee of the Northeast, spent their winters settled in their famous longhouses. These structures were veritable dormitories, reaching up to 100 meters in length, where entire clans lived. Winter in a longhouse was a test of social endurance, no less than physical endurance. The huge windowless space filled with smoke and people required strict organization. The house had an arched structure. A frame of flexible elm trunks was covered with large sheets of bark. Elm bark was an excellent insulator, protecting against wind and snow. Inside, the house was divided into compartments for families, located on either side of the central passageway. A series of fires burned in the passageway, each serving 2 families living opposite each other. The heat in such a house was distributed unevenly. It was cool near the ground, and smoke accumulated under the roof. The sleeping platforms were located about half a meter above the ground to avoid drafts and contact with the cold soil. Above the sleeping areas were shelves for storing supplies and belongings, which also created a kind of canopy that retained heat. In winter, the cracks in the bark were caulked with moss and clay, and the entrances were covered with heavy bearskins. The snow that piled up outside on the sloping roof and walls served as additional insulation. Inside, it was dimly lit, illuminated only by the glow of the fires. People's eyes were constantly watering from the smoke, which was a chronic problem for the inhabitants of longhouses. Life in winter was concentrated inside. It was a time for telling legends, repairing equipment, making clothes, and performing rituals. The density of the population helped to warm the huge room with their breath and body heat. However, this also created ideal conditions for the spread of disease. If one person fell ill, the whole house fell ill. Ventilation was provided through openings in the roof above each hearth. These could be covered with pieces of bark using poles to regulate the draft. The ability to control smoke in such a huge space was a collective responsibility. Food supplies, dried corn, beans, pumpkin, hung from the ceiling in woven baskets, smoking in the smoke. This protected them from rodents and mold. Grain pits dug into the floor and lined with bark stored strategic reserves in case of famine. In winter, the men would go on long hunting trips on snowshoes, leaving the women and elders to maintain life in the house. The hunters' return with their prey was a celebration. Fresh meat was a necessary addition to the plant-based diet. The longhouse was a model of the Iroquois universe, where everyone knew their place. In winter, this social structure became the key to survival. Mutual aid was the law. No one could eat while their neighbor was hungry. This system of collective survival was so effective that the Iroquois dominated the region for centuries. Their homes were warm islands of civilization amid snow-covered forests. Moving through deep snow would have been impossible without the northern people's greatest invention: snowshoes. These were not just an accessory, but an extension of the feet, allowing hunters to glide over snowdrifts that would have buried Europeans waist deep. The design of snowshoes varied depending on the region and type of snow, demonstrating a deep engineering understanding of mechanics. Different shapes were used on the plains and in the forests. Bare paws, wide and short snowshoes without tails, were ideal for maneuvering in dense forests and bushes. Long and narrow Alaskan models were designed for fast movement across open spaces and frozen rivers. The curved toe helped prevent the snowshoes from sinking into the snow when stepping. The frame was made of flexible and durable wood, most often ash or birch, which was steamed and bent into the desired shape. The mesh was woven from rawhide straps, babish, which tightened like strings as they dried. The weaving was not random. In the center, under the foot, the cells were large so that snow would fall through them and not stick, and on the toe and heel, they were small for better buoyancy. The foot was loosely attached to the snowshoe, allowing the heel to lift with each step. This prevented fatigue of the calf muscles and ensured a natural gait. Walking on snowshoes required a special technique, a wide stride in a spread-eagle position so as not to step on one foot with the other. Toboggans, sleds made of curved boards without runners, were used to transport cargo. They did not sink into loose snow but glided over it, distributing the weight of the cargo over a large area. One person could pull a load on a toboggan that two people could not lift in summer. In the mountains and on icy ground, they used special crampons, spikes attached to shoes or special soles that increased friction. This prevented them from slipping on dangerous slopes. Snow removal tools were made from the shoulder blades of large animals or flat pieces of wood. They were used to clear space for camp or dig out traps. Every item of winter equipment was lightweight and repairable. Caring for snowshoes was a daily ritual. Raw hide could get wet and stretch from moisture, so they were dried every night, but not too close to the fire so that the leather would not become brittle. Fur resin varnish protected the wood from moisture. Without these tools, winter would have been a prison. With them, it became a time of freedom. A hunter on snowshoes could even chase down a moose, which would get stuck in deep snow and quickly tire itself out. Snowshoe technology was so advanced that white settlers in the Army adopted it completely, with virtually no changes. This is a rare case where indigenous technology surpassed Western technology. Predicting the weather in winter was a matter of life and death. A sudden blizzard on the plains could begin in a matter of minutes, turning a clear day into a white haze with zero visibility. The Indians knew how to read the slightest changes in their environment that warned them of danger. They lived in constant dialogue with nature. One of the main indicators was the wind and clouds. The appearance of feathery clouds, mare's tails, often heralded a change in the weather in the approach of a front. A halo around the sun or moon, parhelion, in winter was a sure sign of high humidity in the upper layers of the atmosphere and imminent snowfall. Sounds also changed before a storm. In cold, dense air, sounds carried over great distances, but before a snowfall, a special, cotton-like silence descended. Animals fell silent and hid. Birds, usually active, disappeared from the sky. An observant person noticed this lack of movement. Smoke from a fire was an excellent barometer. If the smoke rose in a column, the weather would be good. If it spread across the ground or swirled, the pressure was falling, and bad weather was expected. Sparks that flew too long in the air, or wood that crackled more than usual, also indicated changes in humidity. The behavior of their own bodies also provided clues. Old wounds and joints began to ache before the pressure dropped. Hair became more electrified. The Indians trusted these bodily sensations more than visual signs. Navigating in a blizzard, when neither the sun nor the stars nor landmarks were visible, was a feat of piloting. They used the direction of the wind, if it was steady, and the shape of the snowdrifts, zastrugi, that the wind blew in a certain direction. Even by touch, it was possible to determine which side of the snowdrift was north, as it was harder. They knew how to navigate by the bark of trees and the position of branches. But on open plains, the main guide was often only an inner sense of direction, developed since childhood. Some warriors had a phenomenal ability to stay on course blindly. If a storm caught them off guard, there was one rule: don't move. It was easy to get lost 100 meters from camp. It was better to wait it out, buried in the snow, than to wander around and waste energy. History knows of cases when people froze to death after losing their way, even though salvation was very close. Their knowledge of the terrain was absolute. Every hollow, every stream, every stone was familiar and served as a landmark even under the snow. Their mental map of the territory was more detailed than any drawn map. This ability to foresee and navigate made the Indians masters of the winter steppe. They were not afraid of storms because they knew when they would come and how to meet them. Survival is 90% psychology. Native Americans possessed a unique stoicism and ability to endure hardship without complaint. This was instilled in them from birth. A crying baby was not comforted, but taught patience. Pain, cold, and hunger were perceived as inevitable companions of life, not as tragedies. Many tribes had rituals of cold weather trials. Young warriors would go alone into the winter forest to prove their maturity and gain insight. This strengthened their character and taught them to rely only on themselves. After going through this, a person would no longer fear winter. Humor was an important defense mechanism. Laughing at one's situation, at a comrade's frozen nose, at an unsuccessful hunt meant not letting fear take over the mind. Laughter relieved tension and warmed the soul on dark winter evenings. Collectivism was the basis of psychological stability. People knew that their tribe would not abandon them. Caring for the elderly and the weak was a sacred duty. This sense of solidarity gave people the strength to fight when their physical resources were running low. Storytelling played a therapeutic role. Myths and legends passed around the campfire reminded people of the exploits of their ancestors, who had survived even harsher winters. This placed current difficulties in the context of the great history of the people. Prayer and spiritual practices helped to maintain hope. Belief in guardian spirits gave the feeling that you were not alone in this icy wilderness. Invoking the spirit of the bison or the wind structured reality and gave the illusion of control. The absence of self-pity was a key feature. Pity relaxes and deprives one of willpower. The Indian accepted his fate with dignity. If he was destined to die, he died silently, looking death in the face as an equal. Discipline of the mind allowed them to ignore phantom sensations of warmth before freezing, paradoxical undressing, and fight drowsiness. A warrior could force himself to get up and move, even when his body cried out for rest. This mental fortitude was the foundation on which all other survival skills were built. Technology can fail, skins can tear, fires can go out, but the spirit remains the last line of defense. It was this spirit that allowed indigenous peoples to survive in conditions that broke many newcomers. Their experience is a lesson that human strength lies not in muscles, but in willpower. We have seen that the survival of Native Americans in winter was not magic, but a complex system of knowledge, technology, and philosophy. From the design of moccasins to the architecture of snow shelters, every element has been tested over centuries and paid for with lives. They taught us that nature is not an enemy, but an environment to which we must find the key. A blizzard cannot be defeated by force, but you can sleep through it if you know how to become snow. These methods, born in the icy deserts of the past, are still studied by survival experts and the military. Simplicity, reliability, and efficiency are the three pillars of Native American wisdom. And perhaps we, the inhabitants of warm apartments, should learn from them not only how to build a fire, but also how to remain calm in the face of a storm. Which survival method did you find most surprising? Would you risk spending the night in a snow grave, as the Lakota warriors did? Suggest topics for future videos about Native American life that you would find interesting in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about people who knew how to live in harmony with the wild world.